from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, a sea of red for tech stocks as concerns mount over the debt ceiling deadlock in Washington. Micron tumbles out after delivering a weak forecast, and Peloton feeling the heat as Amazon pushes into connected fitness. We have all your latest market moves. Plus, Amazon is pushing further into the home, this time with a $1,000 plus voice-controlled robot called Astro. Amazon's head of devices and services calling it much more than just Alexa on wheels. I'll ask him how many customers he thinks will pay up. And Pfizer comes a step closer to bringing their vaccines to kids across the U.S. The company has submitted initial data to U.S. regulators for review. Plus, what YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki has to say about misinformation and vaccine hesitancy on their platform. More of that exclusive interview this hour. We'll get to all of it in a moment, but first, it was a tumultuous trading day. Kriti Gupta here now with all the details, and of course, tech getting swept up in the sell-off. Kriti.
Absolutely, Emily. Tech leads to the upside. Tech also leads to the downside. And it really was an indiscriminate day of selling, whether it was tech or small caps or your value stocks. It was all selling. So really important to note here that you did have the S&P 500, a second down day, down 2%. New York FANG index as well, housing those big techs named down 2.5%. But Emily, here's the kicker. Chinese tech did poorly too. This is very different from what we saw yesterday, because even yesterday, big tech was leading the sell-off. But Chinese tech was actually bouncing back. Today, once again, indiscriminate selling. You really see quite a bit of red. And a lot of this has to do with treasury yields in particular. Treasuries also selling off, people hopping out of the bond market in a really aggressive way. You see a 5 basis point jump, not really that significant compared to the 12 basis point jump last week, but still quite the jump in one intraday session. So let's flip up the boards and talk about an intraday story that kind of has a lot to do with this demand growth that we're talking about. A lot of those concerns really showed up in Micron on the individual level. They just reported earnings, Emily. Analysts really putting a lot of emphasis on their forecast, on that demand growth, not just broadly for global growth, but for their chips in particular. And they actually came out, the estimate was 8.6 billion. They came out with 7.6 billion. So shares down over 3% after hours. Let's zoom out though for a second and talk about what this sector has been doing, because semiconductors also sold off today. But if you actually look at this, tech has been doing pretty well year to date. What hasn't been doing so well is those DRAM chips, those memory chip makers. You can see in that blue line, they're really lagging. And Emily, if you were to go even deeper into that sector, you would see that even out of those 30 stocks of the semiconductor sector, Micron is 25th out of 30th when it comes to just how well they're doing in terms of their bottom line. Let's see if that trend holds.
All right, Kriti, thank you for that roundup. I want to stick with the market moves. Of course, as Kriti mentioned, tech losses leading the S&P decline. Bloomberg's Joe Weisenthal joins us now for more. Joe, of course, tech is such a huge part of the market now, so when there is a big sell-off, tech is going to get dragged down. But talk to us about what in particular was driving tech on this particular day.
Yeah, I mean, as you put it exactly, tech is such a big part of the market that, you could have days, and we've had them recently, where a lot of the market does well, tech's weak, and so the headlines look weak. Now, today, everything looks weak, and tech in particular. And a lot of it, historically, recently, there has been this sort of correlation between tech and rates. And perhaps it's not automatically intuitive to some people, but we did see this big pickup in interest rates. And the perception is that tech stocks are sort of like long duration, that if you buy a sort of Amazon, that what you're really buying in a way is like, something deep in the future, earnings that are way out there. And so when the market is in a position in which the discount rate is going up, when rates are going higher, and we can get into those reasons, suddenly people don't feel as comfortable about, say, paying an aggressive multiple for 2030 earnings. And so I think that is sort of like the key macro idea to think of on a day when you see tech and treasuries selling off at the same time.
So talk to us about those reasons for those of us who aren't necessarily following the Fed on an hour-to-hour basis.
So I think there's a handful of things, some of them good, or some of them bad, some of them good. So one of them is the persistence of inflation or supply chain pressures. And, we're getting deep into the year, And these things don't seem to be easing the way some people had hoped. In fact, I just saw, for example, used car prices. We thought maybe those were going to start easing. Still not. Maybe those are back on the upswing. Certain supply chain issues. Every single day, there's another story about a company. They don't have visibility into when there's going to be improvement. I think a lot of people would have hoped that would have changed by now. That feeds into concerns that perhaps, okay, are the central banks around the world going to get cold feet? You know, there has been this idea that central banks, particularly the Fed, is going to allow some sort of inflation overshoot as it hopes to get back to full employment. But as inflation, if it stays elevated, higher for longer, maybe some cold feet, fears of rate hikes. There are some good reasons, potentially improvement in Delta, the numbers are coming down, maybe some cyclical upturn. So it's not entirely bad per se, and we have seen some of that outperformance in the so-called reopening trade, but definitely a number of reasons why people are getting anxious about those long-term rates and inflation.
So I want to talk about the big tech event of the day, which was, of course, Amazon unveiling a slew of devices, flying cameras, bigger Amazon Echoes, a robot that will roll around the home, follow your children or your pets if you'd like. We saw Peloton take a big leg down. They unveiled some home fitness products. Apple, a bit, but not necessarily connected. What's your take?
Well, I think, it's interesting, Peloton, you see there on the screen, falling just a little bit under, just a bit over 4.5%. This is like one of those classic Silicon Valley fears, like what happens when one of the giants invades your turf? And there's always this debate about, does the focused company win, or does the company that has a huge moat and a sort of like, tentacles into every aspect of your life win? And, sometimes one wins or the other, but it's not always obvious. There are certainly many examples I think we could all think of where a company like Alphabet or something enters a new product. Everyone thinks it's going to kill the startup or the smaller company. It doesn't work. But look, Amazon is so powerful because of Prime, because of the videos, because of, the shopping, that there's potentially a lot of power. And when you're talking about sort of like further entrenching itself in the home, also going against Apple, I don't think a lot of people are that comfortable betting against Amazon.
Right. There is the question, though, of how many of these new devices do we actually need and want? Would you buy a $1,500 robot that follows you around the house?
Probably not. But, I don't know, maybe my house has been, I have 2 young kids, and so, of course, my house is messy all the time. Maybe if I found it to be helpful for that reason. But I'm probably not in the market yet for a $1,500 robot.
Yeah, I got 4, and I'm maybe not. Okay, Joe Weisenthal, thank you so much. Always good to have you here on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, in other news, Microsoft will allow Epic Games on its App Store without charging a fee. Microsoft says Fortnite and games from Amazon will be available in the Microsoft Store on Windows, and it won't take a cut of the purchases made through digital storefronts if the third party has its own payment systems. Epic sued Apple after the iPhone maker removed Fortnite from the App Store, citing a workaround that circumvented Apple's commission on purchases. Coming up, more than 6 billion COVID shots have been given at a rate of roughly 31 million a day. How soon are they coming for kids age 5 to 11? That is next. This is Bloomberg. In New York, Governor Kathy Hochul says COVID-19 vaccine mandates for health workers that is in effect this week is working to boost vaccinations. The governor says it's a roadmap for other states fighting the Delta variant. Hochul's office says about 92% of New York nursing home staff had received at least 1 vaccine dose as of Monday, and state data shows 84% of hospital staff were fully inoculated as of last Wednesday. And on a more global front, vaccine doses have reached over 6 billion arms as countries race to vaccinate their populations. In the latest data gathered by Bloomberg, the daily rate of shots now roughly 31 million given per day. The big questions remain, though, around boosters and, of course, shots for kids. For more now, I want to bring in our Bloomberg News senior health editor, Drew Armstrong. Drew, of course, the big news is Pfizer submitting its data on the kids' vaccine to U.S. regulators. What do we know?
So Pfizer and their German partner BioNTech, they basically said that they've started to hand over data to the FDA in preparation for what's going to be a formal emergency use authorization application. Basically, like what we're seeing right now is kind of this rolling process of the companies handing over data to the regulators so they can move as quickly as possible on this and kind of let them digest things as they become available. The key thing that we don't have yet and that we're waiting on is how effective are these vaccines in kids? We know that the safety data look reasonably good. We know that the antibody data look really good. But you really want to know, hey, does this thing work the way it's supposed to? Does it have a big effect on, stopping cases of COVID-19 in 5 to 11-year-olds? That's the thing we're waiting on. That's probably going to be one of the biggest pieces of data that they need to get over to FDA. After that, the timelines we've heard are basically, by around the end of October.
So does that mean kids will be able to be vaccinated before Thanksgiving? I mean, is that the hope?
Well, listen, all of this depends on how quickly that crucial efficacy data comes in, how quickly FDA is then able to review it, if they need to have one of these outside expert panels to discuss it as well. What I will say is that there are a lot of variables in the exact timing on this. It seems quite reasonable to assume that, you would probably have something, by the end of October, very beginning of November, but then you've got the 2 doses spaced apart. And so, you're probably bleeding into the Thanksgiving timeline. And remember, not everybody's going to get this on day one. You're not fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after your second dose. So I know, listen, I'm a parent. I talk to a lot of other parents. Everybody is very anxious to see this get approved on good data. But I think right now there's probably too much to know for certain exactly when this is going to be ready.
Right. Parents are desperate with schools opening and closing, with cases here and there. Let's talk about boosters quickly. Obviously, we know that there are now new windows and age limits for boosters depending on when you got your second dose. But do you think at some point basically everyone will need a booster?
I think there have been a lot of experts who've been saying that, kind of giving out the opinion. I believe Peter Marks from FDA, who's more or less the head of their vaccine office over there, has made, has theorized that. We do know that there is a degree of waning efficacy from these vaccines. We also know that the most important thing, death and hospitalization protection, remains pretty strong. I think it's unclear right now in terms of whether everybody will. And, the way that CDC and FDA acted on this was really based on that uncertainty. You look at the language that they use in terms of who needs these. It's a lot of, people in these frontline positions who are at high risk but otherwise healthy may choose to get a booster. Other people who are at high risk, they said, should get a booster. A lot of very couched language around who should get a booster and when they might need it, which is based on the fact that we don't have fantastic data, showing the need for boosters. And it may be that there isn't one. It may be that the 2 doses are fine for most people, but we don't know that definitively yet.
Okay. Drew Armstrong, our Bloomberg News senior healthcare editor. Drew, thank you for that update. Meantime, misinformation and mistrust around COVID continuing to drive vaccine hesitancy and drag this pandemic on. Critics say social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube aren't doing enough to clamp down on misinformation. In an exclusive interview with YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki, I asked how the platform is tackling this problem.
Taken responsibility very seriously. It's been one of my top priorities. And with regard to COVID and with regard to vaccines, that has been a top priority for us. And we have a number of different ways that we address that. So first of all, we want to make sure that if there's information that violates our policies, we came up with 10 different policies around COVID. Then if that's a violation of policies, then that's something that we'll remove. We removed over 1 million videos associated with COVID. But we also want to make sure that we're raising up information that we think that come from trusted and authoritative sources. And we've really been able to do that.
Have you talked to the Biden administration at all about vaccine hesitancy or vaccine misinformation?
Well, we did an event actually with the Biden administration, including President Biden himself, with a number of creators, Fauci as well, and we really saw that as an opportunity to be able to help and spread that the information that was coming from the administration and coming from experts to using creators and those channels to be able to distribute authoritative, trusted information.
I wonder if there's anything that you see in, the way that anti-vaxxers behave on the platform, if there are any data or insights there that could be helpful to people understanding where they're coming from.
I mean, we try to understand what are the different ways that we can break through. So we talked about in this campaign that we did about getting back to the things that you love. We talked about, we had people that represented all different backgrounds. We had people, like one of them was actually featuring her mom, talking about like how she was thinking about it. So what we really tried to do was get not just from the experts, but also people that were not experts, but who were explaining like why did they take the vaccine? Why was that relevant for them, and what was their thought process? So, and that's a place where I believe YouTube can really shine, is having experts as well as just regular creators and people give their opinions.
That was YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki. We'll have more of that exclusive conversation later this hour. Now, coming up, do we need more devices in our home? How about a robot on wheels? That's just one of several new devices unveiled by Amazon today. We're going to have all the details with Dave Limp, Amazon's Senior Vice President of Devices and Services, next. Amazon has unveiled a slew of new products and services at its annual hardware and services event, ranging from Alexa-powered products to a new in-home robot. Earlier, I spoke with Amazon Senior Vice President of Devices and Services, Dave Limp, started by asking him about the new wall-mounted smart screen, the Amazon Echo Show 15.
As a parent, I've lived through the life of trying to juggle 3 kids, shuffling them around to various soccer games, and our kitchen was a montage of sticky notes and things on the refrigerator. And technology can help solve that. And we think this idea of ambient intelligence and something that's hanging on your wall can not only entertain you through television, but at the same time can help you get more organized by, common family calendar and to-do notes and those kinds of things done in a sort of new way, in a 21st century way.
The biggest talker has to be the Astro robot. Sort of a step beyond Alexa on wheels. We have seen robots like this unveiled in China, and I'm curious what the data is telling you about whether or not consumers really want something like this, and if you see this becoming a mass market consumer device.
Well, as you said, Astro is our new robot that we launched today. It's always a good day when you get to launch a robot. And what it is this idea that we can do more if we can bring technology to you in an ambient way throughout your house. So it's mobile, it can travel throughout your home. And I've had it, I guess, on and off for about a year now. And certainly the home security use case resonates very, very highly with me. You don't necessarily want to put cameras in every room of your house, and this way it can patrol through your house when you're away. And also the idea that it might give you peace of mind. So giving this to my father, who's 85, I love him. He's very mobile, but giving me the ideas and reminders that he's up and about, and being able to communicate with him in an instant, and with Alexa together to have the ability for him to call if anything might go awry.
What does the update cycle look here? I mean, does the price come down below $1,000? Do you add arms to this device? Does it, go up and down stairs eventually?
Well, I think with the technology that we have today, a single floor robot at this price point it was incredibly hard to invent. I will tell you that it was not easy. There's a lot more power inside of this than's in your high-end smartphone that you have today. It's packed full of AI technology, also has wheels, motors, safety systems. I think long-term, though, if you look at a 5 or 10-year horizon, the pace of invention around AI, around robotics, will allow us to do more. Now, whether or not we get to stairs at that particular point at an affordable price, I'm not sure yet, but I do know that the pace of innovation around robotics is accelerating, not decelerating.
How do you think about whether all of this technology in our homes is actually good for us, or if it's encouraging, an over-reliance on devices and, not enough using our own brains?
Well, I'm an optimist, first of all, but I would also say that's kind of what we see. We share that view in that technology should not always be front and center. I used an example today that, I often go home and all my kids are in corners of the house, staring at their phones, and I'd rather have them heads lifted up, enjoying what's going on around us. So what we're trying to invent with this idea of ambient intelligence is, yes, we're using technology, but we want it to fade into the background. When you're not in front of it, it doesn't have to be front and center. It's like our original device, the Kindle. It just faded away. It lets you get lost in your author's words. So too things can around your house do that as well. And when it's working, you'll know it because customers, your family, you can be enjoying music all together. You can watch a movie together. You can be communicating with a new product like with Amazon Glow together. And when you're not using the technology, like I said, it fades away and you don't have to worry about it.
I want to ask you about technology because you did talk about privacy a number of times here, but there seems to be this broad distrust of big tech in general right now and data collection overall. Amazon is facing a number of different complaints about how much information Alexa is collecting about them. How do you earn that trust while rolling these devices out simultaneously?
Well, I think you said it well, which is we have to earn trust of our customers every single day. It's not something that you get to put in the bank and hold for a long period of time. We have to always be earning trust. And to do that with these kind of products, also true of phones and consumer electronics in general, is I believe and we believe that you have to make privacy and security foundational of these products. It's just at the very core of everything that we do. And the form that takes for a customer is give them control of their data. Let them be able to delete it whenever they want. Let them automatically delete it at 90 days or 180 days if they so choose. If we do have cameras in the home, let's put shutters in front of the camera so that when they're closed, a customer can have peace of mind that there's not a camera there. And the list goes on and on. But we have to constantly be inventing new ways to earn that trust, and that is by making sure privacy is front and center.
Dave Limp there, Amazon Senior Vice President of Devices and Services. Very curious to see how those devices play out. Okay, coming up, for years, YouTube was the only company that paid creators. Now Instagram, TikTok, and Snap are also paying up big time. What does it mean for the future of the creator economy? More of my exclusive interview with YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Let's get more on the markets with Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta in New York. Kriti, what are you tracking now?
Well, Emily, let's go macro here because we talked about potential threats to tech, things like volatility in the bond market. But what we haven't talked about is the debt ceiling. We do have that looming. We do have congressmen and House representatives really talking about what that might mean and what that might look like. Janet Yellen issuing a very big warning. But is the market pricing it in? Emily, we crunched the numbers, and if you actually compare this to what happened in December 2018, turns out it takes 15 days to make a round trip in the markets for the S&P 500. But look at the average, look at the medium, that's in the orange and blue lines respectively, not much of a difference. So it's no surprise that, of course, in today's market session where you did see that heavy tech sell-off, you didn't see a ton of reaction, a ton of pricing in this particular market event. That doesn't mean we're going to get it in the future. But what did really affect markets, and tech in particular, and that's going to be the yield story. At least that's what everyone is saying. If you look at this terminal chart, though, and go cross-asset between the S&P 500 volatility and Treasury volatility, something that people say are quite correlated. And of course, you do see that they do tend to move quite simply, except for right now where that correlation, that cross-asset correlation, is near zero, Emily. That tells you what's going on in the bond market and what's going on in the stock market, which is very tech-driven. Not necessarily a causal relationship, not necessarily bouncing off of each other, which brings me to that final story. What what does those big tech returns really look like? Because September has been known for its seasonality. It's been known for really spurring off that sell-off. In the last 10 years, the last 7 Septembers have been negative months, but they'll kind of translate differently when you're looking at some of those big tech names. A big sea of red, but to varying degrees. Amazon, for example, down only 1% in the last month, but compare that to the likes of Facebook, which is far more dependent on things like business advertising and economic growth and that kind of risk-on sentiment, down almost 9%. So, Emily, we can't say that big tech really spurred the sell-off today or really led it to the downside, but look under the hood and they're telling you completely different stories.
All right, Kriti, thank you for that additional context there. Meantime, the creator economy has exploded in recent years and taken YouTube's original tagline, broadcast yourself, to the next level. I spoke exclusively with YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki about the boom in influencers and what the future holds for the creator economy on the video platform.
I see a lot of possibility with the creator economy, and because I see that many people have a lot of interest and they have a lot to offer, and beforehand they wouldn't have been able to have shared that with the world. And so there's so many people, depending upon what their talent or their interest is, whether it's a sport or cooking or gaming or hairstyles, that people have come out and really been able to share that and create a lot of jobs. So we actually see we actually saw a 35% increase in the number of creators that are generating six-figure income out of YouTube and in the last year. And so that's just an example of like how the creator economy is continuing to grow.
Well, and for years, YouTube was the only company that actually paid creators, but now a lot of companies are paying creators. You know, Facebook and Instagram, Snap, TikTok. How do you see that competition playing out? Who wins?
Well, it is a competitive landscape, and in general, competition's good. It makes everyone work harder, and that's good. We look at creators and we say they're going to come to us if we do the best job. And creators come to us looking basically for fame and fortune. Like, how can I have a skill or I have a talent, something I want to share with the world, and YouTube can help that be known, can help them provide that fame, but also we can generate revenue for them. And so as long as we're doing a good job of that, creators are going to come to us. If we start to fail, then they're going to leave us and they're going to go to another platform. And so we just need to work really hard to make sure that we deliver that for our creators.
Do you see TikTok as a sort of existential threat?
We definitely see many competitors in this space. I think we will continue to see more competitors in this space. It's a very dynamic space. And, really what we're just focused on are our own metrics, do we see our users engaging? Where's our opportunity? And we're always looking around and seeing what our competitors are doing. And if they're doing something that we think would be good for our users and our creators, we're also going to look at how we can improve our own economy, creator economy, and what's good for our users.
A year ago, during the Black Lives Matter protest, YouTube made big commitments to Black creators in particular. What's been the progress there? And how do you see the potential for YouTube to be used as a tool for social justice?
Well, so we'd made an announcement that we were going to do a $100 million Black Voices Fund. And so we're continuing to develop content there. But one of the other things, and I think there's been a lot of great content that's come out, and we'll certainly see more. But because YouTube doesn't have any gatekeepers, you can just post and become a creator. We have seen a lot of people of different backgrounds and underrepresented backgrounds become creators and have audiences. We never really measured it beforehand because we didn't have a way. And so one of the things that we've done is we've enabled creators to now tell us what backgrounds they affiliate with, so we can have a better understanding of how they're doing on our platform.
YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki there. We'll have much more of that conversation on an upcoming episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0. But for more on the evolution of the creator economy across platforms, I want to bring in our Bloomberg News tech reporter, Mark Bergen, who covers YouTube specifically. And I'm curious, Mark, from what you heard there and what we've released from this interview with Susan Wojcicki over the last couple of days, what's your biggest takeaway?
Well, it's not surprising. Google uses every opportunity it can to say that there's a lot of competition. And so it's not surprising to hear Susan say that. I think it was interesting to hear her say in the comments, if we are not sort of providing the right tools and economy for our creators, they might leave. And, in YouTube's past 15 years, that statement hasn't really held water until recently. You're seeing Instagram TikTok, and Snapchat become these places where creators can actually have sustainable living in a way that they haven't before. And that's posing an entirely new threat to YouTube. And you're seeing that with their response, not just with the Shorts product, but they're also setting up this massive fund where they're going to start paying out creators with Shorts in a way that they haven't done any before. And that's basically saying, stay with us, don't go to TikTok.
TikTok just announced it has 1 billion users. How does the scale of TikTok compare to YouTube, and how does the value proposition to a creator compare?
So the last stat that YouTube shared about its monthly active users was, I believe in 2019, that was over 2 billion. I'm sure it's approaching 3. The one key difference here is, a lot of TikTok views are, if not exclusively on mobile phones. YouTube has been talking a lot about their growth on television screens. It's a different product in many ways, and one of the key features is just YouTube's depth and breadth, right? Like TikTok does not have, for one, the archival videos. A lot of the mainstream, you can't go watch SNL clips in the same way. You can't watch old baseball clips, and you don't have a lot of the kids videos, which are incredibly popular. There's a huge library of content on YouTube. So I really don't think it's that much of that figure alone is that much of a threat. Still, in some sense, it is a zero-sum game in the fact that all these platforms are competing for eyeballs and for time, and human viewers only have so much time in the day. And to answer your second point, YouTube has been sharing revenue with creators for now 14 years and has this pretty established economy. And a lot of creators that I talk to, clearly YouTube is where they're going to make reliable money. However, I think TikTok especially is a way for them to break through to an audience in something that YouTube is becoming incredibly crowded and really hard for anyone who's not an established creator to gain a considerable audience and then make a lot of money from there.
I want to ask you also about this developing story over at Aussie Media, a digital news site where the COO, according to the New York Times, was impersonating a YouTube executive on a conference call with Goldman Sachs to feign traffic and views that maybe weren't necessarily real. Aussie has come out saying this particular executive was having a mental health issue, but now the FBI and YouTube are investigating. What do you know about this?
We know basically what the New York Times and Ben Smith have reported this amazing story. I mean, the first dead giveaway in some sense was the beginning of that story was that they jumped on a Zoom call. And if you know anyone at Google, they're going to bring you to a Google Meet, not a Zoom call. And then they also, they were using a Gmail address for this YouTube, and no one at Google is going to use a Gmail address rather than their go-to Google. So this is sounds like very serious allegations. It's pretty unprecedented in the world of digital media. That being said, I think it's really kind of telling, and a lot of people have talked about how they haven't really heard much about Aussie as a platform. They've talked a lot about their growth on YouTube. YouTube does live in this dimension. There are, Philip DeFranco is a perfect example. He might not have a lot of viewers for Bloomberg TV, might not know him, but he rakes in millions of viewers on his daily talk show on YouTube. So YouTube does live in this very alternative media world that can have these huge audiences that a lot of people outside of YouTube just don't know.
Interesting. All right, Mark Bergen, who covers YouTube for us, thank you so much for your insights there. We'll keep following that Aussie Media story and how that plays out. Coming up, next door, CEO Sarah Friar joins us to talk about how the app is helping communities stay connected and informed in a post-pandemic world. That is next. This is Bloomberg.
These battery plants will allow us to produce 1 million vehicles worth of batteries per year. That's the scaling we're talking about. We needed a new site because we couldn't slow down with remediation with a brownfield site.
Ford President and CEO Jim Farley on Bloomberg Television earlier today. He joined to talk about the automaker's $11.4 billion plan to build 3 battery factories and an assembly plant for its EV F-Series pickup trucks in Tennessee and Kentucky. The company says the venture with South Korea's SK Innovation will create 11,000 new jobs. Well, over the last year and a half, many of us have gotten to know our neighbors a bit better as we worked and schooled from home. So it's not surprising that data shows 35% of friendships are actually made in neighborhoods more than at work and school. And there's no question your community may be more important now than ever. One company that's learning a lot about how we interact with our neighbors is Nextdoor, which has just released results of a global survey underscoring the importance of neighborhood connections. The hyperlocal community platform is now in 11 countries and says 1 out of every 3 U.S. households uses their network. With me now, Nextdoor CEO Sarah Fryer. Sarah, those numbers are big and getting bigger, and I'm so curious. I know it's National Neighbor Day today. In the last year, what kind of growth and trends have you seen in terms of how neighbors are now using the platform?
Well, thank you, Emily, and happy National Neighbors Day. This actually kicks off a whole month of celebration for us, so we're quite excited to get neighbors posting on the platform all about why they love why hashtag you love your neighborhood. But in terms of what we're learning, you're dead on. People are absolutely much more attuned to local. The survey we just released shows that 61% of people say that neighborhood is the place they want to build community. 72% want to support a local business, who doesn't? And 58% say they have a renewed appreciation for their neighborhood as they are doing much more work from home, for example.
You're in 11 countries. Tell us about how what you're seeing in the U.S. compares to how neighbors in other parts of the world are turning to Nextdoor.
So frankly, there's just a lot more similarities than differences. We are in 11 countries, but as I look across the globe, actually in anticipation of kicking off Neighbor Month, we've been doing some really good neighbor awards in Australia, in the UK, and in the Netherlands. And the stories are very similar about how people have come together to give and to get help. We know that during the pandemic in particular, people really looked to those that were nearby them. There was tremendous power and proximity, but it's the same wherever you go. Australia's hopefully about to come out of a pretty gnarly lockdown. And so those neighbors have been keeping each other cheerful. They have been making sure the elderly, those that might be more immunocompromised, are being looked after. If you look at a country like the UK, much more focused on local business right now, but nevertheless, the trends are much more similar than different, which is great to hear for all of us who care about the neighborhood.
The FBI here in the U.S. just came out with some new and startling statistics about crime in 2020, saying property crime is down, violent crime is up, murder is way up, almost 30%. And I'm curious if you're seeing any data on the platform that adds additional context to those numbers.
We're definitely not seeing a lot that would suggest there's more crime, broadly speaking. We do know that safety is an important part of any neighborhood, and neighbors will often use Nextdoor in order to make sure that they are feeling safe. Package thefts, for example, would come on that list. More broadly, I think what we are seeing in terms of trends are more neighbors are moving. About 1 in 3 on the platform actually moved last year. We're definitely seeing that they're moving out of urban areas into suburban areas. I think that's much more about quality of life, access to green spaces, maybe less about security that you're asking about. And of course, we know that neighbors are doing more around their homes. So those are more the types of trends that we are picking up on. It does mean there are brands that are endemic to the platform that might be around things like home services and home security that do very well, but nothing as extreme as those FBI stats. Very sorry to hear those, in fact.
Right. Well, you know, staying on the crime beat for just another moment, the Gabby Petito case has taken the U.S. by storm, and her parents have thanked folks on social media for helping to advance the case. You know, I'm curious, you know, when it comes to Nextdoor, there's been this sort of concern about the rise of digital vigilantism. And what's your take on that, given that, you know, certainly there can be positive results, but the pendulum can also swing in the wrong direction?
Yeah, it's something you have to take incredibly serious. And I always say Nextdoor was founded on trust, right? It begins with real people at a real address. So a lot of the trolling that you might see on other platforms, it's much harder to do when you're that real person and you might actually show up in the local coffee shop right next to them. So people are on better behavior. We're a guideline-driven platform. One of the things we instigated over the last year was the Good Neighbor Pledge, so that as you join, or if you hadn't gone through it, you're reminded to be helpful, to be respectful, not to discriminate. Of course, there's lots of places we can use technology to slow people down. We did this with Kindness Reminder that I've talked to you about before, but more recently we have launched things like an anti-racism reminder. We've used it for COVID-19 misinformation reminders. We also want to make sure that overall, if someone does report, that it's going not just to the neighbors in the neighborhood that might review, but it can come into a next door reviewer as well. That neighborhood team that I just talked about, incredibly important for local context. And I'm really happy to say that that team has gotten much bigger over the last couple of years. And in fact, we just launched a team member called the Welcome Team Member to actually welcome neighbors to the neighborhood. And I think that's all about setting the right tone.
Last quick question. You just had your investor day. You've got a SPAC coming up. When's that going to happen and how big is it going to be?
Sure. So as you know, we announced our SPAC in early July timeframe. We're now in the de-SPAC process. We had a great investor day last week. We actually raised our guidance, raised revenue growth rate this year to 47% from 44%. And for next year, 40% growth again. So hyper growth platform at scale. In terms of when we de-SPAC, we're continuing to move through our SEC process. We're feeling really upbeat about it at the moment, and watch the space for when the ticker KIND will finally be ready to go on the New York Stock Exchange.
All right, we are watching that space. Sarah Friar, CEO of Nextdoor. Great to have you back here, Sarah, on the show. Good luck. Coming up, we're going to speak with the CEO of the data analytics startup Amplitude as it makes its trading debut. We'll talk about why the direct listing over IPO and what's next. This is Bloomberg. The data analytics company Amplitude made its trading debut, ending the day up more than 56%. It's the latest in a string of tech companies to go public via direct listing. At the helm, the youngest software CEO to take a company public since Aaron Levy of Box back in 2015. Amplitude's co-founder and CEO Spencer Skates joins us now. So Spencer, obviously big day for you. Much has been made of the fact that you are so young. How does it feel to get out there?
Oh, we're incredibly excited. I think first, just to prove what a massive opportunity there is to sell to the chief product officer in the enterprise. It's one of the most underserved personas that there is. And then secondly, just to prove the model that we do with a direct listing and showing that it can work for B2B companies, even if you're not a large, well-known consumer brand.
56% pop, that's great momentum, but do you have any concerns about leaving money on the table?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I think this is one of the big advantages of a direct listing over a traditional IPO. With a traditional IPO, you consistently underprice your company. If you look at 2020, the average company going through a traditional IPO underpriced themselves by 20%, which is absolutely massive. And so there's no question in my mind that a direct listing was the right choice for Amplitude, and I'm really happy to see how we did today, and I'm really excited to see other companies follow this path.
You know, I know you're a benchmark company. We've heard a lot from Bill Gurley about how he prefers direct listings over traditional IPOs. Was that what tipped the scales for you? I know Benchmark's Eric Vistria is also on your board.
It definitely helped. When I was first learning about the process, I spent a lot of time studying the different ways that you could go public, firstly through a SPAC, through a traditional IPO, through a modified IPO with an auction, and finally through a direct listing. And it was so clear that the advantages of a direct listing were head and shoulders above everyone else. You can get market-based pricing for your stock on the very first day. I think the problem with a traditional IPO is that you're effectively selling what should be worth $1 for 50 cents. And so as a CEO and a fiduciary to my shareholders, there's absolutely no way that anyone was going to get me to do a traditional IPO, whether or not we had Benchmark on the board. We're really excited about their support. It's the second direct listing they've done. What's also exciting, it's also it's the first direct listing for a lot of the other VCs that are on our board, including the folks at Sequoia and a few others.
You say Amplitude is what Adobe does for marketing and Salesforce does for sales. Much has been made about your leadership, you being, such a young founder and CEO to take a company public. Do you think your age is an advantage?
I've been really lucky within Silicon Valley. There were a lot of people that were willing to invest in whatever potential they saw in me from a relatively early age. I came out when I was 21. And I've been very lucky to lead Amplitude for the last 10 years. I think, it definitely helps you. I'd say the bigger thing about Silicon Valley is that, people don't hold your age against you, which is definitely something that's been very frustrating for me growing up in other parts of the country. And so I'm just really excited that, we're able to show that there's not just what we've accomplished so far, but that there's a massive opportunity ahead of us with Amplitude.
And quick question, post-pandemic growth, now that we're coming out of this, what do you see as the road for growth ahead?
Well, we've already given a forecast of 40% growth for 2022, so we're really excited about that. I think, exactly when what growth happens, it's going to be hard to say. But I think the macro trend of digital becoming way more important, the product being the revenue center in all these companies, and those product managers and chief product officers needing a system of record to do their jobs, that's absolutely happening.
All right. Amplitude CEO and co-founder Spencer Skates, thanks for joining us on The Big Day. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We're going to be joined by Pandu Nayak, Google Vice President of Search, plus Marshall Sandman of Animal Capital, along with TikTok star Griffin Johnson.